Hey there, hockey fans. Nick Hart here, and I am back for a brand new edition of every hockey geek's favorite new toy, 6 Degrees of Tom Kostopoulos. This is our third video in this series. If you haven't seen the first two, go check them out. Or if you want to, you can save them for later. That's okay too. This is America. You can do whatever you want. But before we get started on this round of 6 Degrees of Tom Kostopoulos, I need to give a quick refresher on what we're doing in these videos. A more in-depth explanation of these rules is back in video number 1, but for our purposes, just to re-jog the memory, let's reset the table here. The basic concept of these videos is that we can connect any NHLer in history to the beloved former captain of the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, thanks in large part to Kostopoulos' long and fruitful pro career at both the AHL and NHL levels. We'll start with one player and then draw a line to Tom Kostopoulos via a thread of common teammates. The players that we start with can be an NHLer from any team starting from 1942, the start of what's typically referred to as the original six era. When we try and connect the dots from our starting point to TK, each teammate we look at will count as one step, 1 degree of separation. We want to connect that first guy to Tom Kostopoulos in as few degrees of separation as possible. Now, we'll start with someone that played in the NHL, but then we can use any league after that to try and reach TK. College hockey, junior hockey, the AHL, the ECHL, et al. However, we can never use the same player twice. So anyone who appeared in our previous videos, they're no longer considered a viable option to get to Kostopoulos. Once again, these rules are laid out slightly more in depth in our first video, but if you're along for the ride now, I think you'll figure it out. So without any further ado, who will we be tracing to Tom Kostopoulos today? Today's selection goes way back to forward Dutch Hiller. Dutch Hiller, whose real first name is Wilbert, was a diminutive winger during his playing days, but he made up for his small stature with his reputation as one of the fastest skaters in his era, that era being the late 30s and 40s. After playing junior and minor pro hockey in Sudbury, Ontario, Hiller made the uncommon decision to play overseas. But he didn't play in Sweden, Finland, or Russia, countries that we recognize today as top European alternatives to Canada and the US. No, he went to England. Hiller played 42 games in North London, more than he had logged in the previous 3 years combined, and his speed and hockey sense naturally made him one of the best players in the league. And that experience proved to be important when he returned to North America a year later, as he was able to earn his NHL debut with the New York Rangers towards the end of the 1937-38 season when he was 22 years old. Hiller became a mainstay for the Rangers over the next 3 seasons, and he won the Stanley Cup with the Blue Shirts in 1940, the last championship for the club until 1994. Hiller was claimed on waivers by the Detroit Red Wings in 1941, but only played 7 games in the Motor City before the Wings traded him to the Boston Bruins. And then Boston later traded Hiller to the Montreal Canadiens in 1942, but the fleet-footed forward made a return to New York for the 1943-44 season, during which he put up a career-high 40 points. Hiller played the last 2 seasons of his NHL career back with the Canadiens, and he provided reliable secondary scoring and used his defensive acumen to keep opponents off the score sheet while legends like Toe Blake, Elmer Locke, and Rocket Richard filled the net during their shifts. It was a winning formula, leading Hiller and the Habs to lifting the Stanley Cup in 1946. Deteriorating eyesight hindered Hiller late in his career. He even tried an early, likely underdeveloped form of contact lenses to try and ease his troubles. Alas, they failed, and his condition led him to leaving the NHL after winning the title in 46. However, it didn't mean that he walked away from the game completely. He played 1 season in the American Hockey League for the Pittsburgh Hornets, and then wrapped up his playing career in an Ontario Senior Pro League before briefly becoming a coach in California. Hiller ultimately dressed in 383 NHL games, scoring 91 goals and adding 113 assists for 204 career points. He may not have had a Hall of Fame career, and he was never an NHL All-Star, but his signature speed helped build a lasting reputation that still stands today. Once again, we have a long way to go to get from Tom KOSTOPOULOS, given that Dutch Hiller played in the midst of the original Six era, but we want to try and do it in as few degrees of separation as possible. So to try and reach TK quickly, our first step to do so is Paul Bibo. Paul Bibo was a goalie on the Canadiens roster with Hiller when the Habs won the Cup in 1946, even though Bibo didn't play at all in the playoffs. In fact, despite the fact that Bibo was under contract to Montreal for most of his NHL career, he played fewer than half of his 213 regular season games in a Canadian sweater. What do I mean? Well, Montreal just let him play for other teams, like sort of as a favor. Seriously. Back in the day, player loans were much more common than they are today. And I'm not talking about assigning a player on loan to a minor league affiliate. We obviously see that all the time these days. I'm talking about NHL teams loaning their talent to another NHL team. Signed as a free agent out of junior, Bibo played 96 games for the Canadiens from 1941 to 1943, but when it became clear that future Hall of Famer Bill Durnan was emerging as the Habs goalie of the future, Montreal simply loaned Bibo to the Toronto Maple Leafs. They didn't trade him, they just said, hey, here you go. Bibo had his best season statistically with the Leafs in 1943-44, including 5 shutouts, but that couldn't prevent the levy from breaking in the playoffs when playing against, you guessed it, the Montreal Canadiens. The next year, Bibo was loaned by Montreal to the Boston Bruins when their goalie, Frank Brimsek, left to join the United States Coast Guard during World War II. He filled in admirably over parts of the next 2 seasons, but when Durnan went down with an injury in 1946, the Canadiens rescinded the loan and brought back Bibo for 10 games until Durnan was ready to go. The 1946-47 season marked the first time that Bibo's rights weren't owned by Montreal, and that's because the Canadiens finally traded the well-traveled goaltender to the Chicago Blackhawks for veteran forward George Allen. After the season, the Hawks and the Habs reversed the trade, sending Allen back to Chicago and Bibo back to Montreal, but that was it for his NHL tenure. Bibo moved into a pseudo-management role with the Canadiens while continuing to play a handful of seasons in the AHL and IHL for the Buffalo Bisons and Cincinnati Mohawks. So Bibo concluded his NHL career with the Chicago Blackhawks, but as his career was winding down, there was a youngster on that Hawks squad who was very early in what turned out to be a very long career. On that team was a rookie defenseman by the name of Bill Gatsby. Bill Gatsby played the first of 20 NHL seasons with the Blackhawks. Right away, Chicago knew they had something special. Gatsby made a great play that led to an assist on just his second shift in the league, but later that same night in his debut, Gatsby suffered a cut that required 12 stitches. Gatsby later estimated that they were the first 12 of what would be 650 stitches he received during his NHL career, but unfazed by his little boo-boo, the Calgary, Alberta native continued to play a strong two-way game for the Blackhawks and finished his rookie year with 8 goals. That led all NHL defensemen, not just rookies. He continued to grow and develop and eventually earned the captaincy for the Blackhawks in the 1952-53 and 53-54 seasons. Early in the 1954-55 campaign, Chicago traded Gatsby to the New York Rangers, and his ascent continued. In his first full season in the city that never sleeps, he was named a first-team All-Star thanks to putting up a whopping 42 assists and 51 points. Both of those figures topped all League D-men. He was a first-team All-Star and led all defensemen in assists and points again in 57-58 and 58-59. That last season, 58-59, Gatsby was so dominant that he finished with 12 more points and 16 more assists than the defensemen that finished as runners-up in both of those categories. And despite all of this individual success, Gatsby was playing for the Blue Shirts early in what was a 54-year Stanley Cup dry spell. In fact, the Rangers only made the playoffs in 3 of Gatsby's 7 seasons with the clubs, and in all 3 of those instances, they failed to win a round. So, in February of 1960, New York tried to do a swap of all-star defensemen by sending Gatsby and Eddie Shack to the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for the great Red Kelly and Billy McNeil. Except they thought they did. It turns out Kelly and McNeil both refused to report to New York, and the league was forced to nullify the trade 2 days later. Gatsby stuck with the Rangers until they finally figured out a way to send him to Detroit in the summer of 1961 as part of a deal for Les Hunt. The Wings had just lost in the final the year before, and this looked like Gatsby's best chance to win a cup, but it was never meant to be. Detroit came close a couple of times, reaching the final, but falling short of lifting Lord Stanley in 63, 64, and 1966, the last of which ended up being the great Gatsby's final NHL season. So Gatsby went into the history books as another in a long line of New York Rangers greats never to win a Stanley Cup. He never won a Norris Trophy as the league's best defenseman either, but he did retire as the NHL's all-time scoring leader among defensemen with 568 points in 1,248 games. Those contributions made him a shoo-in for the Hockey Hall of Fame, which he was inducted into in 1970. Like I said before, it was a long and decorated career for Bill Gatsby, but there's one guy with whom he shared a locker room that is one of the few who can say he had an even longer and even more fruitful time as a pro hockey player. Our next stop on the route to Tom Kostopoulos is, this is a big one, Gordy Howe. Howe is truly one of the greatest legends in the history of hockey. A Mount Rushmore caliber career, his name is not only revered by those who saw him play, not only by his peers and other elite all-time skaters like Wayne Gretzky, but Gordy Howe remains a household name to this day, even to those who have never seen so much of a highlight of his playing days. If you're a hockey fan, you know all about Gordy Howe. So I'm not going to use this time on our video to talk about how he won 4 Stanley Cups with the Detroit Red Wings. I'm not going to talk about how he led the league in goals 5 times, led the league in points 6 times, how he won 6 Hart trophies as the league's MVP and was named a first-team All-Star 12 different times, nor am I going to talk about how he played for a record 26 NHL seasons and over 2,000 pro games and still sits atop the leaderboard for the most games played in NHL history. I'm not going to talk about how he ended up with a career so prolific that he actually earned the nickname Mr. Hockey. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about just one night in Gordy Howe's professional hockey career. In fact, it was the very last game of his pro career, a game that took place on October 3rd, 1997, when Howe was at the ripe young age of 69 years old. The Detroit Vipers were coming off of their most successful season, winning the Turner Cup in '97 as champions of the International Hockey League. Vipers ownership were determined to capitalize on that success and make the team one of the hottest tickets in town, despite the fact that their league wasn't on the same level as the Detroit Red Wings or Detroit Pistons of the NBA or Detroit Lions of the NFL. Someone in the Vipers front office had the bright idea to bring back Gordy Howe for one game. He'd play for the Vipers and then ride off into the sunset, all as one big publicity stunt for the defending IHL champs. What started off as a long shot in some marketing room started to become closer to reality when the Vipers approached Gordy and his wife Colleen about it, and they turned out to be quite receptive to the idea. Eventually, a deal was struck. Gordy Howe would join the Detroit Vipers for their season opener, not as a guest, not as an ambassador, but a player. The stunt worked because the Vipers sold out the Palace of Auburn Hills and packed it to the gills with hockey fans who not only could celebrate the banner raising of their championship from the year before, but also see one of the game's living legends take the ice one more time. Many Vipers players remember the building shaking as the PA announcer fired up the crowd before Howe even stepped foot on the ice. Other Vipers have remarked in the years since that it was the loudest they had ever heard a hockey arena in their life. The 69-year-old Howe played only one shift early in the first period, a shift that lasted 46 seconds, but it was more than enough to satisfy the raucous crowd at the Palace. In fact, he almost scored. He was credited with a shot on goal when a bid from the point glanced off of his leg and prompted a quick reflex stop by former NHLer John Casey. Howe then spent the rest of the night jawing on the bench with his new teammates and interacting with fans during intermission before calling it a night before the third period. The person who had the best seat in the house for this unique and historic occasion was the guy who was parked right next to Howe on the bench for most of the game, the backup goalie. And the Detroit Vipers' understudy for the crease that night was Johann Hedberg, and he's our link to Tom Kostopoulos. Johann Hedberg was a 9th-round pick of the Philadelphia Flyers in 1994 while he was in the midst of establishing himself as one of Sweden's best goaltenders. He led all Swedish Elite League goalies in save percentage his rookie year in 1993 and then finished third in that category in both the 1995-96 and 96-97 seasons. After that, Hedberg finally came to North America in hopes of reaching the NHL. Instead, he started the season with the Vipers of the IHL, and he ended up spending some time in the ECHL with the Baton Rouge Kingfish, and then ended the year in the IHL with the Manitoba Moose. Philadelphia traded his rights to the San Jose Sharks, and Hedberg went back to Sweden. In his return to his hometown of Leksand, Sweden, Hedberg once again led the Swedish Elite League in save percentage as well as goals against average. And with his confidence perhaps restored, Hedberg returned to the United States in 1999. He toiled around the AHL for a year and ended up back in the IHL with the Manitoba Moose until the Pittsburgh Penguins swooped in and gave the Swedish netminder new life. The Penguins traded for Hedberg in March of 2001, and he stepped between the posts and won his first start for Pittsburgh later that same week. Over the next 2 seasons, Hedberg became the full-time starter for the Black and Gold and captured the hearts of Penguins fans with his acrobatic saves and penchant for lunging poke checks. Nicknamed Moose as an homage to the team the Penguins acquired him from prior to being thrust into the spotlight, fans would lovingly chant the name Moose every time he made a save. And the better the save, the longer and more sustained the Moose would be. It was a relatively short honeymoon, however, as Pittsburgh traded Hedberg to the Vancouver Canucks prior to the 2003-04 season. Even so, Hedberg's career was off and running. He played another 9 years in the NHL as either a serviceable starter or trustworthy backup, and the Moose completed his career with 373 games played for the Penguins, Canucks, Dallas Stars, Atlanta Thrashers, and New Jersey Devils. Throughout that time, he ended up being a teammate of Tom Kostopoulos twice during parts of the 2001-02 and 2002-03 seasons in Pittsburgh, and then again in both of what was their final NHL season, 2012-13 in New Jersey. There you have it, folks. Those keeping track will know that that was 5 degrees of separation from Dutch Hiller all the way back when the NHL was stabilizing in the 1940s to get to Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins legend Tom Kostopoulos. We got big assists in there from a pair of legendary skaters to help cut down the steps it would take us to get there. Who knows? That might hurt us in the long run, but it was worth it for this video in order to connect Dutch Hiller to Tom Kostopoulos in only 5 degrees of separation. Let's review. We started with Hiller, the speedy winger from the dawn of the original 6 era, who played in front of Montreal goalie Paul Bibo, who ended his NHL career as a teammate of a young future Hall of Fame defenseman Bill Gatsby, who played in Detroit with Mr. Hockey Gordy Howe, and we used his long reach over a storied career to get to goalie Johann Hedberg, and then we rode the Moose back to TK. Now remember, per our own rules, we cannot use any of these players in our future videos. Losing a guy like Gordy Howe, who had a career longer than a CVS receipt, could come back to bite us. It was a tough call, but we decided to go forward with it. It is a way to ensure that we reached Kostopoulos in as few steps as possible. Who will we try and connect to TK next time? You'll have to stay posted and keep checking the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins social media for updates because we'll be back with another episode soon. This was 6 Degrees of Tom Kostopoulos, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed these little lessons and fun facts. Stay safe and stay sane, everyone. See you next time.